UK Crime Book Club. I am here with lovely Bryan. I'm not we need to introduce you properly before I get into the questions, but I've been really looking forward to this all day. So show off some books and say hello to everyone.
Good evening, hello everybody. I'm Bryan Lawson. I'm the author of the Drake and Heppel series of crime mysteries. This is the first one. There are currently 4 of them, and a 5th is still halfway in my head and halfway on my computer. I'm working away at it. It's taking a bit longer than usual because, well, it's quite a complicated plot, and I've got to work it all out. So shall I tell you something about the books?
Yes, please.
Okay. I always say that in my books, place and time are as important as the characters. And I hope, Sam, if you're reading one of my books, you can pick up what that means. First of all, place. All my books are set in real places. I have to make up the odd house where somebody's murdered because I don't think that would be very nice, would it? To suddenly find your house on somebody's website as the place somebody was murdered. In fact, that reminds me to tell you that I'm gradually working from now backwards. I've done the last 2. I'm putting photographs of all the locations of my books on my website. So when you're looking at your book, you can click on my website, click on look at locations, and they come up chapter by chapter. So if that interests you, it's there and it's available. Some people really seem to like it.
I love that. I really do.
Okay, well, because the places are important to me and they are important to the plot, I thought it was only fair to show people all these places. They're all places I know. I have to say I've been fantastically lucky in that people have wanted me to go all over the world working. So I've been to lots
of places.
Yes, I have been to lots of places. I haven't actually been to the Antarctic. It's the only continent I haven't worked on. They don't want me down there, so that's no big problem. I prefer warm places to cold ones anyway. So places are important to me. They're important to the book. What actually happens in each of my novels could only happen in that particular place. And it's something to do with the place itself, but it's also to do with time. All my novels, I should say, are set in the current era. I'm not one of those people who writes historical novels. I wouldn't want to do that. But events and people in the past, as well as in the present, in these places, are all important in the plot. And sometimes I actually involve the odd historical character in a plot. I've very cheekily involved Franz Joseph, who's the emperor of the Franco-Russian Empire, Franco-Hungarian Empire, I should say, in my last book. It's a bit cheeky, isn't it, really, to involve some great historical figure. He doesn't, of course, say anything because he's been dead a couple of 100 years, but things that he did are of significance in the book. Don't go away with the idea that this means you have to know a lot of history. You don't have to know any history. I've done all the history for you. And it's not a major part of the book, but it's an angle that I think is a little bit different perhaps from some other novels you might read. So the past is present, the past is important, the present is important, but the places are all real, with the exception of the little one. Now, perhaps I might just say that characters remain important in my books, and I try to make all my characters interesting. So they're interesting people who do interesting things.
Yeah, and they all stand out from each other as well, which is nice.
They're what? Sorry?
They all stand out from each other as well,
good.
which
Yes.
is nice.
I hope so, yeah. Because of their past, because of their background. People are part of their background, aren't they? Their background makes
Absolutely.
them. So I hope that gives you an angle on the book, that it's full of interesting things, not just the major crime mystery itself. In fact, I try to make the whole book mysterious. I won't go into the technical details of how we authors do that, but I try to make the whole feeling of the book a little bit mysterious. And as you go through it, there'll be lots of little question marks that crop up in your head, and they'll only be answered maybe in the next chapter, or sometimes there's a prologue to one of my books, the meaning of which doesn't become apparent until the last chapter of the book. And the prologue
That's a dangerous game to play, isn't it?
It's very nobody's complained about it. Everybody that talks to me about it says they like it. But the prologue is set back in history. In fact, it's set during the Second World War in a very particular place, and that becomes apparent as you go through. You get little hints about it, but you can't put it all together until the last chapter, when, of course, the crime itself is unravelled. So what shall I say? I say something about place, something about special thing about time, something happening with a certain character at a certain time in a certain place, maybe of importance in the story. And I make the characters, as much as I can, interesting people. My main detective is a man called Drake. He's in the final years of his career, which has been very, very successful. In his later life, he decides to move from the Metropolitan Police, where he's been working. Given today's news or yesterday's news, that would be a good move, wouldn't it? But anyway, he look puzzled.
No, I'm nodding.
Metropolitan Police have just been put in special measures, which is a very disturbing thing.
Very disturbing.
Our best police force, or so it should be, is in special measures. Which reminds me, I hope you don't mind a little diversion here.
Love a diversion.
I've been thinking today and been a bit sad today. I had a very good friend, in fact, two very good friends, who were ex-Met police officers. Mick, I'll just say Mick, was from Special Branch. They have been fantastic in helping me with all those little questions you have about how do things happen. It's not always the very technical things about police. Sometimes it's how would a detective sergeant and a detective constable address each other in a certain place or at a certain time. It's questions that it would be difficult to ask to anybody else, but he's been there for me for years, answering. And we used to meet with Mick and his wife in Penang in Malaysia every March. We would go and spend March there because we were all in love with that part of the world. And very sadly, Mick, the last time we saw him in Penang, Mick told us he had a progressive lung disease. And each year of COVID, Mick has been desperate to go back to Penang, and each year it's proved impossible. Very sadly, he died a couple of months ago. So COVID took the last 2 or 3 years of his life away. And isn't that sad? And now I have no one to turn to. My brain often goes, oh, I'd ask Mick this, but I haven't got any Mick anymore. So I'm a little bit sad today. And I think if he heard the news about the Met Police, he'd be absolutely devastated, because it was something that he dearly loved and believed in. Anyway, that's a diversion.
No, I think it's really nice to keep our friends' memories with us.
Yes, well, he'll always be with me, because I'll always be thinking about him when I'm writing a book. So there we are. First book.
Very distinctive covers.
This is a photograph of mine. It's a photograph of the pedestrian suspension bridge in Chester. Now, with one exception, my books are all set in Chester. I was born in Chester, so it's a city I know particularly well. And I think what I'll do, actually, if you don't mind, I'll read you the blurb off the back of this book, because I think it raises a number of things that I would want to say. This is a story of the past sneaking up on the present and making a real mess of things. It is September 2005. A member of the Singapore Parliament is found murdered on a footbridge in Chester. This footbridge. Murky Oriental history is entangled with events at Diva University, a new institution doing its best to create traditions. Do these new ivory towers hide more worldly pursuits, what really goes on behind the mental facades in Chester. So that's the first book, and it gives you a kind of flavour of what I've been saying. It's set in Chester, but you can see it's partly about Singapore. Second book, which is a bit of an odd one out in a way for me, it's called Without Trace. And in this book, the Minister for the Arts goes missing in the interval of an opera at Covent Garden. And the book is really, how can they find him? Where is he? Is he still alive? What are they doing to him if he is? And so on and so on. And one of the clues they get early on tells them that they think he might have been taken abroad. So they have to go chasing after him on quite a wild goose chase that ends up in Australia. Anyway, I'll say no more than that.
That is one big goose chase.
Very big, as big as you can get, I suppose.
Yeah.
Then the third book, Fatal Practice. This is about a famous architect, and he is found murdered. He works in Chester, but he's found murdered in a barn in a farm just outside Chester. And Drake goes to find out what this is all about. Within a matter of a day or so, one of his colleagues is found murdered in Penang, in Malaysia, in a particularly gruesome sort of way. Although my books, I should say, are not full of horrid violence and gore, but he's murdered. So Drake has to find out if these two murders are connected, because it seems a bit of a coincidence. And if they are connected, what's it all about? So that's that book. And then finally, one I think you said you're reading at the moment.
I am.
Which is actually said by readers who've spoken to me or written to me. They say it's the best so far, which is nice, isn't it? Because that means I must be getting better rather than getting worse.
Which is always nice to
It's
know.
a good thing, isn't it? Well, this book starts in Chester, and it starts at a concert in a new concert hall. And halfway through this concert, something dreadful happens. And I won't say any more about it than that.
I think it's okay to say a bit, because this is right at the beginning, so I don't think it's
okay. Well, what really happens, I'll give that little bit away. Again, it's told back to front to make it a bit more mysterious in the book, but a very famous flute player has agreed to play at this concert. She lives in Chester. Suddenly, she's due to play in the second half. And as the second half starts, everything goes quiet, because the usher went to her room to find her, to bring her to the concert, and she's dead. So this is set in the world of music. The other thing that my novels all have is a theme. So the first one, the theme is about university. The second one, the theme is about opera, actually. And the third one, the theme is about architecture. This fourth one is about music. The novel I'm writing at the moment is about painters. And painting is a very complicated and curious sort of world. I think we talked about this the other day. I was asking Sam if she knew what happens to a famous painting that gets stolen. You often hear about these.
And I said no.
You said no. We were present at one once in an art gallery in Amsterdam. All of a sudden, there were sirens blasting and police came in, and we were all hurdled together and videoed. Somebody had walked off in the middle of the day with two famous Van Gogh paintings. To this day, I don't.
You didn't tell me that.
Well, to this day, I don't know what happened to them. Whether the police do or not, I don't know. But the answer to the question, what happens to these paintings, is this. Almost invariably, when paintings are stolen, they're stolen by people who are professional at stealing paintings. I use the word professional in inverted commas. That's what they do. That's what they do for life. They, however, don't want the painting. Having a very famous painting, or even a moderately famous one, is quite a dangerous occupation. So they sell it to somebody who turns out to be a sort of agent in the underworld. This agent will almost certainly sell it to somebody else. And that somebody else will turn out to be the chief, the boss of some huge organized crime syndicate. And these characters have got a lot of money, but they're responsible for a huge amount of crime. They know that sooner or later it's possible they might get arrested. If they get arrested and if they get found guilty, they trade these paintings that they have, these famous paintings, they trade them in to the police in return for reductions in their sentence. So that's why famous paintings are sold quite often. It's to go to help some great monster of crime get off the lighter sentence that he otherwise have had. This started mostly in Italy, but it's spread across the whole world now. So the world of art is not quite what it looks, is it? It's great for a crime mystery novel. So my fourth novel is in that world, and it also goes to another country where forgery, and it's also quite often the case, I should have said earlier, that in the intermediate stage, when this painting has been stolen, some art forgers copy it, and they copy it very closely and very accurately. And the problem then is to find out which is a forgery and which is real. And some of these forgeries are incredibly realistic. So it's a very complicated world, and I'm having great fun trying to wind all this round a murder and a mystery.
I'm just thinking about the paintings because I've heard about reproductions and how incredible some of them are. So is it a case of testing the paint? Is it the paper that it's on, or not paper, obviously, but the
yes,
I can't think what the word is that I'm after.
Yeah, well, the investigation into whether a painting is real or not is incredibly scientific in large part. But getting the things that are scientifically tested right is not difficult for some of these forgers. They're professional at it. So they will use the right kind of paint. They'll use very old paper or canvas or whatever it is.
Canvas, thank you. That was the word I was after.
Good, canvas. Good word.
Canvas, thank you.
We always say we're painting on a canvas, don't we? Even if it's a watercolor, which is on paper. But anyway, they can get all that sort of stuff right. But can they get the artist right? And that's a matter of judgment of experts. And they're not always 100% right. So with some things, you never quite know whether a painting that has appeared was actually the painting that was stolen or was actually a reproduction of it. It's a very, very complicated, sinister and world of huge amounts of money, and huge consequences, because these bosses of organized crime who can use these paintings to trade off maybe many years of a sentence they would get otherwise. So it's worth huge amounts of money, or the equivalent of huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
So that's
fascinating stuff.
And
as you say, great fodder for an author.
Yes. Oh, great fun. And I should say I've been writing crime mysteries now for about a decade, and I've only got 4.5 written. That's because for a long time I was still writing non-fiction books. I wrote non-fiction books all my life.
You've written a couple of non-fiction books and articles.
Sorry?
You've written a couple of non-fiction books and articles.
Yes, just a couple.
Just how many have you done, roughly?
About 300 altogether. But that was my job. So, but I started to write crime mysteries before I stopped writing those kind of books. And I wrote books which were partly academic, but partly in subject areas meant for the general public as well. And quite honestly, I thought writing crime mystery was going to be easier than writing non-fiction books, but it's a heck of a lot more difficult because you've got to imagine everything. When you're writing a non-fiction book, the theory tells you what to write, more or less. You know about it. It's full of facts. But our skill of writing crime mysteries, I think, is a very high-level skill because you've really got to imagine the whole thing. And then you've got to wrap it up in such a way that it becomes mysterious. I think I have great admiration for crime mystery novelists.
I have to agree. I mean, that's why there's so much fascination for you know, Kaz and myself and the admins, we have such a blast reading everybody's books, discovering new authors. It's an
Yeah,
amazing hobby.
yeah. Well, this group is a testament to how interesting it is. I think I'm right in saying that it's the most popular genre for writing at the moment. More people buy
I would
crime.
imagine it's,
No,
yeah, huge, and within
I've seen
subgenres
some
as well.
somewhere that say that more crime mystery books are sold than any other particular genre of fiction.
They
So
offer
that
such an escape, don't they? And they offer such a challenge for people, for the you know, the authors, the writers, as well as the readers.
yeah,
They offer this. It's a hugely rewarding thing to
yeah,
read a book and get lost in it.
yes, yes. So I was born in Chester, city of Chester, which is a wonderful historic city and full of
Beautiful.
brilliant locations for
Yeah.
crime. And I spent a lot of my time at Oxford as well. And I initially wanted to write books about Oxford, but it's been done before, hasn't it? Writing crime novels about Oxford, rather.
It has, but it might be nice to see what yours would be like, because it wouldn't be like
Yes,
other people's.
yes. But anyway, I'm very happy using Chester rather than Oxford. Some you do find a few authors, don't you, who write always about the same location. Donna Leon comes to mind, and I'm puzzled why she doesn't get mentioned more on this book club. Have you noticed that she doesn't? She's one of the most successful writers, dozens and dozens of books, but somehow she doesn't get mentioned here very much. I've found.
I did start a post the other day, and I've not gone back to it for a few days. Maybe I definitely didn't look at it today or yesterday, maybe the day before. And it was for authors who aren't mentioned daily. So nobody was allowed to recommend themselves,
All right,
but it was for readers and authors to recommend other authors that we, you know, whose names we want to get out there. So there's a big selection on there. I am
right,
fairly certain that Donna's name came up.
right. I'm not surprised to hear that. I I I quite enjoy her books, and they're interesting exercises in writing about the same place all the time. Venice, of course, she writes about, in case anybody doesn't know. But I don't know about you. I think perhaps her books have too much of the ancillary material in them. That she's very fond of her characters, and she spends a lot of time developing the characters more than I do. And sometimes working out the crime in her books isn't as difficult as all that. But they're wonderful books to read. I think very easy to read, and so I quite like her writing in a way.
I haven't actually read any of her books. It's another, you know, another author on a never-ending list.
I
There are no
think
complaints about the never-ending list. I like the never-ending list, but
yeah, I
I
think she's
generally
written.
read for the interviews more than anything else.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah. I think she's written about 40 or 50 books. It's an enormous amount of work.
Wow.
Of course, she's got a great start with Venice. It's a fantastic location. With
Yeah.
I don't know whether you know Venice, but it's
I've never been, but it is beautiful.
it's very beautiful. But it's also full of sort of sinister backwaters and things. You know,
Didn't know that.
you can imagine crime taking place there somehow. And of course, it's not just the mainland; it's got islands as well. But her. So yeah, she writes the same character, same place, and she's managed to do that for a whole career. I'm not sure I could even dream of doing that.
We haven't done, and we're almost halfway in already, and we haven't done hellos to everybody. So let's have a look. So Aggie, hello. I know Kaz is watching. Oh, and Kaz said, fab idea having locations to match the books. She's a big fan of that.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. So there is a link in the ebook that I haven't clicked yet, but it's right at the beginning, so you can have a look.
Right, okay.
And on your website as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So
The way I've done it is I've put it on the website. So if you just go to my website and click on the book that you're reading or the book that you're interested in, you will then get one of the buttons you can click is see locations, and click on that, and they just come up, scroll up. I hope people won't be tempted to scroll too far down to start with, because I haven't really thought it through in great detail, but that could give away some bits of the story.
Spoilers.
Yeah. So you can read.
So I suppose you find a location that you like and then you click on that and no further.
Yeah. I hope so. And I think I was saying this to you the other day. My chapters are quite short in these books now. They're about 2,000 words long. In my first two books, my chapters were much longer. And I much prefer writing books with shorter chapters. So it's 2,000 words is quite a nice amount to write about a particular event at a particular location and then move on. Whereas 4,000 or 5,000 word chapters can feel a bit heavy, I think, when you're reading them. Be interesting to know.
It's interesting that as you're going along, the process is progressing itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And finding what works for you. So that's really good. And clearly it's working for the readers as well, which is a benefit, obviously.
Yep. Should I tell you something about my background? Would that be interesting to people, do you think?
Absolutely. So I'll just say hello to anyone who said hello, because there are a lot of hellos and comments. And I was trying to look on my phone because we can't see. Will Templeton. I enjoyed checking out the photos online.
Oh, good. Thank you, Will, because I think I asked him. I think I asked him about that. I think he read the first book, but he hasn't. I don't know. He may have read the later book. Yeah, that's good. But
we'll go back to some of that. I want to hear what you want to say.
Well, I just thought it might be odd. It might be a good thing to most people, when they hear about me, think I'm very odd. And I suppose I am. Really.
That is not a thought that entered my head at all.
Well, they think I'm odd because I first went to study architecture, and that's where I studied in Oxford for 5 years, studying architecture. And I'd thought, quite innocently really, I'd thought before I studied architecture that it would be more about people than it was. Of course, it's about buildings, but it's about how people use those buildings.
Yeah, of course.
And so I drew a line under that and went off and read 2 higher degrees in psychology. So I'm an oddity, because not many people have got degrees in architecture and psychology, and people say, what on earth? Why on earth were you doing that?
But the two sound like they go hand in hand.
Yeah, they do to me. I'm glad you think that.
Yeah. It makes sense when you're looking at how people use a space and how different personalities, different jobs would use a space and how it would work for them. It sounds, they do go hand in hand.
And it's more than just a nice idea. It's a very, very important idea. I spent the last bit of my career studying healthcare buildings, and we put together a huge list of publications about something to do with people in hospital or people in certain circumstances or that sort of area. And we put all this together and made a sort of design tool out of it. And if you follow our design tool and design a hospital with all the principles that we lay out in this, you can build a hospital for nothing, because the amount you will save in people's time in hospital wouldn't work that way in the NHS, because it's not based on money. What would happen in the NHS is we'd get rid of the waiting list very, very quickly. The first piece of research that was ever done in this area showed that women who were in a women's hospital, who had a view out of a window that had nature in it, got released from hospital 1 or 2 days earlier than women who didn't have that. So it's kind of quite hard evidence. It's not just nice stuff, but it's quite hard stuff as well. So it's not as silly as it sounds at first.
No, I don't think it sounds silly at all. I think the fact that you care so much about it that you think, right, this is what was missing from that degree, this is what I need to be good at that.
Yeah.
And the fact that you took literally years of your life learning that, just shows the commitment to getting things right, which I think we could all use a bit more of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's turned out to be rather useful when you're writing crime fiction.
Of course.
I hadn't anticipated that, but it suddenly occurred to me one day when I was reading a book by an old colleague of mine whose work I admire enormously, a man called Barry Maitland. I don't know whether you've heard of his name either. He's actually in the group now.
He is in the group.
Yes. He was at one time, he and I worked together at Sheffield University. And he went off to Australia and he's published all these crime novels, having retired from his other job, his day job, as it were, in Australia. And the books don't often get seen over here. When I've been in Australia and people know I know Barry Maitland, I suddenly become a hero because they think he's so wonderful over there. But he isn't a common household name here, is he, in the UK? And I don't think any of his books are actually published here, but of course you can get them through Amazon. And I was reading one of his books and thinking, I might be able to do this. And I'd been reading a Donna Leon book at the same time as well. And that's how I started thinking, well, maybe I could do it. But it took me a long time to write the first novel. And I think the first lesson I learned, it took me a long time to learn it. Sounds very silly, but in writing factual books, you're explaining things. You're explaining the world in some way or other. Writing crime mysteries, you're deceiving people about the world. It's almost exact opposite. And you need to write. You're not just writing about a different topic, but you need to write in a completely different way. So a lot of the skills I had writing non-fiction turn out not to be all that useful to write crime mysteries.
Well, it's understandable. You never think about the fact that you are literally flipping things on their heads, and all of the secrets and the lies and the twists and the turns and there's a unreliable narrator is the phrase I was trying to think of. There's so many different things that you can do.
Yeah.
It's quite overwhelming.
Yes.
Trying to make any decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think again, the problem with writing a crime book is, where do you start? If you're writing a factual book, you know where you start. You start at the beginning of the subject or whatever it is. But if you're writing a crime mystery, how do you know where to start? And I've often found, just to begin with, I made a mess of where to start, I think. I've got better at it. But I've got a principle. One of my guiding principles is, and if you've seen this book about the flautist, a major event must happen ideally on the first page, or certainly inside the first 1,000 words in my books. Again, one of my criticisms of Donna Leon is you could read maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 chapters before the crime happens. And so I'm quite certain that some major surprising event, dramatic event, must happen on the first few pages of my books, and it does.
And it works really well.
Good.
Yeah, definitely. Because it gets your interest straight away. There are some books that do start off slower, and sometimes I find that harder to get into, because you're just wondering, well, what's going to happen, and do I really need to know all of this? And anything that's making you think about something that isn't the story is always going to pull you out of the story.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll give away one secret about my books, because it helps me explain so many things. If you read the first book, this one, you meet my police characters for the first time. And this raises some problems I'll talk about in a bit, remind me in a minute, about writing a series in such a way that the books can be read in any order. And you can read my books in any order. I write them so you can, but the best way to read them is in the order they were written.
I think I actually wrote that down from us talking about it the other day so that I wouldn't forget.
Ah, good. Well, it is important, and it's a very tricky, I don't know whether other authors talk about this, but writing books so they're standalone and yet use the same characters, and you want the characters to have moved on, but you don't want to have to read the first book before the second book, if you know what I mean. And you're not doing that. You're reading the fourth book first.
I'm reading the fourth book, but I will go back. I do generally read them in order.
Right.
However, when we've got an interview, if I've not managed to get to the books earlier on because of the reading list that we have,
Yeah.
then I will start with at least the most recent and
Right.
then work my way from the start till I catch up to there again.
Okay, so I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, and it's in the first book. You meet Drake, who's chief detective inspector, and he's working at that time in the Met, and he gets rung up by an old friend of his, very senior position in the Met, who says he wants him to go and head a new unit, which they're going to call the diplomatic unit. And what this means is that he will be responsible for looking after cases where there may be some awkward diplomatic elements to it. So the first book, where this Singaporean member of parliament is murdered in England, has got these kind of diplomatic issues. As you can imagine, in real life, the first thing that would happen is the Singaporean government would be on to the Met Police saying what's happening, and we want to know. They want to know how the information is going to be released, all sorts of things. And he was deemed to be very good at being able to handle this. So you meet him, and you meet two other characters a little bit later on. But very early in the book, you begin to realize that Drake isn't particularly happy. I should say he's not. I haven't got a detective who swears a lot or who drinks a lot, or I know those kind of people are often popular, but he's a level-headed sort of chap who's done a good job, but he's a little bit sad. The fact that he's sad is shown in several incidents, and it's only a little while into the book that you realize that his wife has just died, and that's why he's sad. But he's sad in a particular way. His wife was an architect. I know a bit about architects. And she was a very famous and successful architect, so she worked all over the world. And every time she went abroad on one of her visits, she asked Drake to come with her. But he was always too busy because he was always wrapped up in a case. So he and his wife never spent as much time together as they would have liked. And now he's been looking after her just before the first book starts, and she's died of cancer. And now he's in his head, trying to understand more about his wife. And he has guilt feelings because he didn't spend enough time with her. And so during the first book and during all the other books as well, he frequently reminisces about his wife. But he also begins to learn about architecture because he has to go to various places. And he asks himself, what would Cynthia, my wife, have said about this place? And so he's going through a sort of a working out of grief and guilt as you go through the four books. But I don't explain all that the way I've just explained it to you. You see for a while he's sad and that he's a bit moody and not really fully. His colleagues think he's something wrong. But eventually you hear that his wife has died. So that's an example, I think, of an important issue being brought into a book backwards. You see the symptoms first and the reason later on, as it were. And I think crime writing is all about that. It's about getting things the other way around to the way they would be in a non-fiction book.
Yeah, and then putting those questions in the reader's head of why is he sad? Why is this going on? Why is this situation like that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's quite a clever thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like those kind of details.
Sorry?
I like those kind of details. It's very true to life.
Yeah. So I use that sort of technique quite a bit if I can, of things happening. Things happen and then the explanation behind them, and sometimes even the history behind them, doesn't come out until quite a bit later on. Somebody might have a particular feeling about a certain person, but you're not told straight away what it is. You find out later on.
As you would in real life.
Yes, it is in a way. That's quite right. You're quite right. And what that tells us is writing non-fiction books is not like real life at all. You explain things in a rather tedious, although I try not to be tedious, but you know
Not
what I mean.
tedious.
You explain books, you explain things in the book bit by bit in the right order to understand it. So if you were doing that in a fiction book, the first thing it'd say on page 1 of my first book is, "This is Chief Inspector Drake. His wife has just died," because that explains what's going to happen in the next few chapters. But I actually do it the other way around, and
Which I like very much.
It took me a long time to work that out, and so I had to go back and rewrite things. So I was a bit slow because I was learning so much, not about writing, but about writing crime fiction. And I don't know whether you find this, sometimes people say to you when you're an author, "How on earth do you write 100,000 words?" You know, and that never occurs to me as a question at all, because I've been doing it all my life, writing books. So that idea of writing a whole book didn't frighten me, and I didn't worry about it. I knew it would happen if I went about it in the right kind of way. But learning how to write crime fiction, there isn't a textbook on it. Maybe there ought to be. No, that would be dull, wouldn't it? No, maybe.
I suppose there are a lot of books that teach it in different ways, and everybody must just need to pick and choose the bits that are right for them.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing. Not an easy thing at all.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I'll go to some of the. There are a lot of people watching, so let me scroll through. So Colin Blackman, hi Laura, hi Johnny, Pauline, Will, Kaz. I know Leslie was going to come and try and join. TG wasn't sure she was going to make it tonight, but she's here. Hello. So we've got.
Hello.
Did I just miss somebody? Daniel as well. Agnieszka. Wow, we've got a lot. Laura says, came across Donna Leon when my library's book bubble. Thank you for the tongue twister. Did Chianti Crime Italian based? She was a popular choice for that theme.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
We've got Drake stands out for most detective characters, literally head and shoulders above most, says Will.
Who says that?
Will. So Will is very tall, but I can't imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine Will stooping though. Being uncomfortable in a way with his height.
I say sometimes in the book that he walks as if he's examining the pavement in front of
you. Yeah. And it's very descriptive, and it really gives you an idea of what he's doing.
Yes. Well, I've got to thank you to Will on that, because originally I just said he was very tall. And Will said, "Why don't you say how tall he is?" So I do, and he's 6'6".
See, I'm very short. I'm 5 foot, so everybody that's over 6 foot is a giant to me. Yeah, they're a long way up.
Well, my dear friend Mick, who I said earlier on died, who was in the Met, he was a tall man and a big man. He was a lovely chap, the best friend I've ever had in my life, really. Lovely chap. And we were walking along the pavement one evening. My wife and I are huge enthusiasts for ice hockey.
Oh, I love ice hockey.
We watch the Sheffield Steelers all the time. And we were walking with Mick from a restaurant where we'd been eating to the ice hockey rink for this game of ice hockey. And 2 lads came running past us and jumped over the fence into the front of a building. And Mick instantly turned from lovely friend into stern copper and shouted at these boys, "Where are you going? What do you think you're doing?" This guy. And I thought, gosh, you've got to have amazing courage to do that. And these boys froze instantly and were very polite and said they were just after their football and it was all right. He got this ability to turn instantly from being a human being into being this kind of very stern, inquisitorial. And I think Drake's a little bit like that. I haven't modelled Drake on Mick at all, but he's a gentle soul, but he commands respect, I think.
You asked me to make a note of something, and it was series as standalones.
Yes.
So, how difficult is that to not give things away? Because we have talked about it a bit,
right?
But I feel that there was more that you wanted to say on it.
I think it's very difficult, and I've seen it discussed a little bit here in this group. And I don't know what other authors really think about it. For me, I wanted the books to be a series, but I wanted each one to be readable in its own right. So what has to happen is that one or two things, and they're usually things about the characters that you keep running through the book, like Drake and Detective Sergeant Grace Heppel, who's his right-hand woman, and a few other characters. They progress through the series of books. So somehow in the later books, I have to explain a bit about them, which wouldn't happen in the first book. You'd get to learn about them. And it's judging how much to do that and how much to put in. But I think a reader, on the one hand, I think readers want to do what you've done, which is to pick up one of the books and read it. And other readers say they want to read a series through from beginning to end, and they get cross when they've got to the end of the series because the author isn't writing fast enough. If
that is a big complaint in the group. Authors need to write faster.
If that happens to me, I should be very pleased. But almost inevitably, it has to be a bit about the character development, doesn't it? Your characters have to move on. Otherwise, what would you say about them? You can't just go on saying the same things about them and have them doing the same things. So they have to develop a bit. But on the other hand, where they've come from has to be very briefly, but somehow explained in the later books. And I think getting all that right is really difficult to do. Similarly, a little bit about locations, because my books are all in Chester with one exception. I find if I'm not careful, I'm repeating descriptions of places that we've seen in earlier books. So I keep that to a minimum. I don't spend a lot of time describing places, but I hope that the way people move around in those spaces gives you a feeling for them. And you can look at the pictures in the... Actually, the other thing you can do, and I thought about this, whether to put a search in. The other thing you can do is you can go and look at all my locations on Google Earth and walk around in them. And guess what? I do that, even though these are locations that I always know. So I know Singapore very well, I know Chester very well, and so on. But when I'm writing about a particular location, I Google Earth it to make sure that my memory is correct. Because I find I've had one or two readers reprimand me for getting street names wrong or saying something a little bit wrong about one place in their beloved city. So you've got to be right about these places if you're going to write about real places. And Google Earth is fantastic. So readers I could put a little search string, couldn't I? Each picture.
You could.
You could go off and walk around in the places. Maybe that's taking it too far. But I find that's a terrific resource, Google Earth. And I think anyone who writes about real places, especially urban places, it's terrific to go and see and make your own mind up about what's important in a place and what you miss the first time you see it, and then see it later and this kind of thing. Drake does quite a lot of that. He goes to places that his wife had told him about, like Sydney, for example, and he doesn't understand why she said certain things about these places, but gradually he begins to see it her way.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
I hope that happens well in the book.
I did, I used to work in a primary school. Google came in one day with, there were cardboard VR headsets with mobile phones in them. And we all sat on benches in the hall. And I'm 5 foot, so some of the kids were taller than me, sat on these benches. And we did a tour of Rio de Janeiro. And that's even more fascinating because you can literally turn around and you're seeing Sugarloaf Mountain and Christ the Redeemer, and it was gorgeous, and you really felt like you were there. So I know obviously sometimes there's no substitute for going to the place, but the world has been brought to us.
Yes, absolutely, you're absolutely right. But it's interesting you mentioned Rio de Janeiro. I did a lecture tour through Brazil some years ago and went to Rio, and I knew that that this business of very great poverty and great riches are very close proximity in Rio, closer than any other city I know in the world. I knew that, but I was walking back from, you can walk along the beaches, Copacabana and what's the other one called? I've forgotten what the other one's called, Ipanema. And you can walk maybe a block back, and then you walk another block back. And if you're not careful, maybe 3 or 4 blocks back, you've got into a place that it's not really very safe to be in.
Okay.
And I was about 2 or 3 blocks back from the coast one night walking around. I went into a shop to get some sweets to suck, came out, and there was a little boy, little urchin with his dirt on his face and his trousers up his legs, and one sock down and one sock up, and that kind of, all those kind of things. And he wanted, I've got 6. Well, I forget what I can't remember what the Brazilian currency is now. Oh, real. It's real, I think. Have you reals? So I delved in my pocket and gave him a small coin. Within seconds, there were 20 of them around me, mobbing me, and pulling at me. All lovely little kids, but obviously living in great poverty. And it comes home to you very suddenly. You can't do anything about this as a tourist, can you? You can't suddenly solve all the problems of the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, but you just feel guilty about being there in a way. And that taught me a lesson about being in a place and enjoying it and having the privilege to look at it without actually having to live there.
Yeah.
And they're not always the same sort of places when you have to live there. So Rio is a fantastic place, but a little bit frightening. It's interesting. It's coming to my mind. I don't know why. I've talked a bit about Sydney. Sydney's in one of my books. Hong Kong's going to be in the next book. It's big cities with sea in them. Like Rio's got this fantastic beach. Sydney's got this incredible bridge. Where the two combined come close together, the scale of the sea and the scale of smaller buildings and things pushed tightly together. I think that cities, Hong Kong, I absolutely adore Hong Kong. I have been there, of course, for the last couple of years, and sadly, I don't think it'll be the same place as it was the last time I was there. But it's full of the most amazing locations and places, which you're famous. You've seen all the views from the peak of Hong Kong, looking down into the harbour. It's terrific. So I love cities that have got, a big drama in them in terms of having the sea and the land pushed together in an interesting kind of way. I'm sure Drake would love those cities.
I'm sure he would. T says, what an interesting, extraordinary life you've led.
Sorry?
T said, what an interesting, extraordinary life you've led, Bryan.
Well, I've been incredibly lucky. And, I was talking to somebody only yesterday who's just done his A-levels and is trying to plan his life in front of him. And I said to him something I always used to say to my students. A career happens to you, not you happen to it. It's nearly always the case that the big things that happen during your life happen by accident. You happen to be there when somebody else was there, or you happen to see something in a paper, or I don't know what it is. But if I look back through my life, it was always just accidents. I didn't plan to go here and go there and go everywhere. But
I would say exactly the same thing.
Yeah, would you? Yeah. I think it's true, don't you? I think it's true. And I think you can't plan your career. You can maybe make the next move and try to make it in such a way that it creates more opportunities for you than less. Don't get too pinned down too soon. I don't like our school system because it makes students study individual subjects at A-level, which is wrong. The Scottish system is much better. I think they have 5, what do they call them, hires or something, don't they? And a lot of again, because I've been around the world a bit, I've seen educational systems elsewhere, and it's always much better if they keep the education more general while kids are still at school. You know, I read, for goodness sake, I read physics, maths, and chemistry at school. None of those are particularly useful to what I do now, but I had to choose 3 A levels, you know, and I wanted to do physics and art, but the headmaster in those days said, Lawson, he said, you've got to choose whether you're in the arts sixth form or the science sixth form. You can't be in both. And so I had to give up the art and do chemistry of all things.
It's
I think
funny.
things are better than that now. I think things are better now.
People go through life not having a qualification but being able to do things. I didn't have a GCSE. I didn't get GCSE maths. I got an ungraded. I sat a different paper than was recommended, but it was recommended in front of all of the children sitting waiting for an exam.
Right.
So of course, Pride said, no, I'm going to stick with the higher.
Yeah.
So I was told I fell off the end. So I couldn't even get a C or a D from the paper that I took. So I didn't get a maths qualification till I was 37, 38.
Yeah.
Only in the last 3 years. So, but I taught maths in primary school.
Right.
And I actually
Gosh, I
found
admire that. I really admire that.
I don't know how I did it, but I found
Well,
it.
you tried
I
it
found it
yourself.
really helpful not having a
Yeah.
clue, because I could
Yes.
see
You had to
the
learn again.
children who were struggling,
How
and they
good.
were saying, "No, I understand that,"
Yeah.
and I'd think, "You don't. I won't tell you that you don't. We'll say, right, we're just going to do this other one." And we'd do a bit more and not make a big deal out of it. And there was a child who didn't like maths, was terrified of maths when I first met
Oh
them,
my gosh.
but I
But
could see what it was.
oh,
So by the time they
terrific.
left primary school, they were saying it was their favourite subject.
Oh, that's lovely, Sam. That's brilliant.
So the fact that I didn't have a clue
Gave
about
you that
maths,
insight.
it gave me the insight into
Yeah.
it, because I
Yeah.
found it very stressful.
Yeah.
Whereas give me English and I'm fine,
Yeah.
So
I do think careers are like that. I mean, you can plan them a little bit, but I mean, I've just been tremendously lucky and privileged throughout my life. As I say, I've worked on every continent for, not necessarily for long periods of time, but and it's because it's getting to know the people as well. That's the fantastic thing. A place is people and activities. It's not just buildings, and that's what I found wrong about the way architecture was taught at Oxford when I was a student, and that's what set me off on this wild goose chase of reading about psychology and then eventually writing crime fiction. Which
it's
is
lovely how it all ties together.
Sorry?
It's lovely how it all ties together.
Yeah. Well, it does in my head. It does in my head. Most people think it's a bit odd.
No, I don't think it's odd. I don't think it's odd at all. Do you know, it's nearly 8 o'clock.
Is it? Good gracious. Good gracious.
It is 1959. So do you want to give us a recap, and then everybody knows what to go and buy?
Okay. So it's the Drake and Happel Mysteries. First, a degree of death. The second, whoops, I've got them in the wrong order now. Sorry. The second one is Without Trace, about a government minister going missing and being sought after. The next one is a really, really deeply intertwined book about architects practicing in the UK and in a country, Malaysia, which has all sorts of different traditions and religions and belief systems, and they all get mixed up together in what goes wrong. Sometimes I think, especially people like British architects, have gone very badly wrong when they've gone to a foreign country and designed without really understanding what makes that place tick. And they essentially built an English building in a foreign country. That's a horrid thing to do. And then the final one so far is The Flautist, and it's about a flute player who gets murdered, and then they all find all sorts of things about her life that nobody knew before. And she led a very complicated and curious life and came from a very, very complicated family. In fact, her family, I'll tell you one more thing about her. Her family were evacuated from Czechoslovakia during the Iron Curtain days. And she and her father escaped, but her mother never escaped, and she never saw her again. And so it's quite a complicated story about her. I hope you haven't come to that bit yet.
I've not come to that bit yet.
Ah, well, I won't tell you anymore.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the members and the admins who've come along tonight, and thank you to you, Bryan.
Okay,
What a
thank you
lovely
very much.
hour.
Thanks very much. Thanks for watching, everybody.